Project Binky in colour. Starring Nick Blackhurst. Also starring Richard Brunning. And Rex Hamilton as Abraham Lincoln.
Tonight's episode, The Larch.
Coming up on Project Binky.
Nick hits things with hammers. I fluff my lines.
Mank in there. Oh, this is bollocks. Nick, can't do it.
And we both sit down for a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. At the end of episode 2, we'd managed to hang the complete front suspension and shafts from the brand new hard mounting points. Since then, Nick's filled in the bare steelwork with some more 2mm plate. And what a lovely job he's done of it too.
There's still a bit of work to do on these bottom arm mounts, but I can't really finish them off until I've got the bulkhead in. I can't fit the bulkhead until I've fitted the engine and box, which logically kind of makes it the next job on the list. So I'm going to start with the rear suspension.
Yes, you're absolutely right, he is a git. However, there is method behind his madness. Sometimes. We want to get all the hard mounting points finished and secure before moving on to the engine mounting. Space is at a premium under the back end, and the Celica running gear is a hefty bit of kit. I have a sneaking suspicion that the next part might involve a grinder and a hammer.
Clearly, that rear axle and suspension setup isn't going to just slot straight in, so some more metal's got to go. That means this seat back and what's left of the boot floor. So I'm going to crack on with that in just a minute, but right now, I'm jonesing for some inch box.
Here we go again, folks. It's time to turn the welder up to 11 and embark upon a 20-minute free-form welding odyssey. Oh, come on, really? More welding? I mean, I've had it up to here with welding. This whole series is just Nick welding and grinding and welding and grinding. I'm losing the will to live, I have to be honest. I don't know why everybody watches it. Thank God for that, he's finished.
Now this may all seem a little bit over the top for a Mini, but as it stands, we've no real strength behind the B-posts and where the sill clamps are. What strength there is left, I'm going to be cutting out. So this bracing has got to do 5 things.
3 things.
3 things. Firstly, when I start cutting and welding, it should stop any twist or distortion in the back end. Secondly, when I take the boot floor brace out, it should stop the whole thing dropping. And thirdly, it should get right on my nips as I'm trying to work around it.
Never want to do things by halves. There's a hell of a lot of inch box in there. There's strengthening triangles everywhere.
The weather's not too bad today, but it's pretty bracing in here. Sorry. Rich, come and cut me out.
After jokes like that, mate, you're on your own.
This is not going to be good for rear seat passengers.
Like anyone would be mad enough to want to get in the back of this thing. So I left him there overnight to have a long, hard think about the damage he's done with that joke to the reputation of British comedy. And in the morning I got him out and had him crack on with cutting out the rear seat back and wait a minute, that's not a grinder. What the deuce? I knew it wasn't going to be too long before he got the hammer out though. Oh, thank heaven for that. Normal service is resumed. I'm sure that Nick not using a grinder when the opportunity presents itself is one of the 7 signs of the apocalypse. Well, the seat back might have gone, but there's still a fair amount of floor in there that needs to come out. Getting this thing out is definitely going to take another pair of hands.
Possibly hadn't thought this through.
No matter what Nick says, this panel clearly isn't coming out of the boot. So we're out of ideas and it's time for a think. And before any of you say it, we have checked, and yes, we can actually fight our way out of a wet paper bag. Honestly. No, really, we can.
Told you we weren't coming out of the mood.
Engage smug mode.
Well, if it weren't ruined before, it is now.
I'd say that cutting that lump of metal, and I use the word metal in its loosest possible sense, out of the car has really pushed us past the point of no return. I'm fairly sure that we actually passed that a long time ago, but still.
So I finally persuaded Nick to get in the kitchen and get the kettle on, while I venture into his man cave and check on progress. And what I found is a dirty, great, big, bloody hole. Now I'm sure that this is all part of the plan, and that he's ready to put in the rear suspension negative jig thing. So he tells me. I don't believe him.
What I haven't told him is I haven't actually built it yet. So you might as well show you how it's done.
See, I told you we didn't believe him.
So we're going to take you through how we made the negative rear suspension jig thingy. The subframe is bolted to the car at 10 points plus the 2 strut tops. And here's the 4 main subframe bolts. This is the trailing arm bracket. This is the subframe support plate mount. And this is where the anti-roll bar bolts on. The frontmost main subframe bolts are captive, but they move in a slot. We'll need to make sure this stays bang in the middle to give us the full range of movement, so we've turned down a special bush and washer to allow us to centre it in the slot and fix it there. We're going to bolt this little lot to the points on the Celica and then tie the whole lot together with a load of steel. And here they all are in situ on the Celica. Just got to take a few measurements to allow us to build the basic frame. So here's the start of the rear suspension negative jig thingy. The 2 measurements you saw Nick taking just now are the long and the short pieces here. And now we're just going to clamp it up and start welding the bits in. It's critical that the Celica is square and flat, and that the new frame is also absolutely level, so the spirit level comes into its own at this point. Here's some welding for you, because we haven't seen any for approximately 5.5 minutes, and quite frankly I was going withdrawal. And here's the first part of the rear suspension negative jig thing complete. We've made the strut part of the jig as a separate bolt-on unit, as it's impossible to fit the whole thing under the Mini in one piece. We can strip this bit off and start with all the subframe mounting points before moving on to the strut tops and towers. All we've got to do now is take it out and finish it off properly.
Right, I know a lot of you think that I don't do much in this project and I never get my hands dirty. Well, here's the proof. I do get my hands dirty. They're bloody filthy at the moment. I'll have you know that I play a very important role in this project.
Get a kettle on!
He must have fell over to have gotten his hands that dirty. Not before wrecking a nearly new cutting disc. It's a good job he's a mate. People have gone in the book for a lot less.
The list of miscreants is long and extensive.
Anyway, moving on. We've managed to finish the rear negative suspension jig thingy. And here it is.
We've got the front subframe mount and the subframe strengthening plate, the rear main subframe mount, the trailing arm pickup, the anti-roll bar mount, and last but not least, the strut top.
Here we go again then, trying to set the rear suspension jig in the correct position 3-dimensionally within the car. As with the front, side to side is easy. Centre line of the jig is the centre line of the car. Height-wise, it's got to be set relative to the front suspension I've already fitted, and we're back to the drawing I did of the Celica before I stripped it. I'll save you from the calculations, but the end result is the bottom of this frame needs to go up another 11mm, which I think means we're going to be okay with the back seat base, and we're going to lose about 50mm off the boot floor. Front to back, well, this plumb line is the centre line of the Mini wheel arch, and this bit of box section represents the centre line of the Celica wheel arch, which pretty much means the whole frame's got to come forward 142mm.
I'm sure Nick's not happy about having to cut 150mm out of his brand new floor. However, he has to get the grinder out, so every cloud and all. With the cutouts now complete, we can slide the jig forward and clamp it into its final position. We've made up some new subframe main mounting points, and we can bolt those to the jig, ready to build down to. As we've already established, Toyota built the GT-Four to survive a direct hit with a bunker buster bomb, so we're going to need some very heavy duty chassis rails to hang this thing off, so we'll start there. Here's the steel pattern clamped up ready for welding, and this is the finished template. We've lopped the top off some 100 by 50 by 2mm box to make a U-channel, and now we'll bend the ends over to make a flange that will become the boot floor level. So this is what the chassis rails start out like. And using the template, we can cut and bend them to look like this. We've made a captive nut plate that sits in the channel and will pick up the anti-roll bar mount, allowing us to bolt it onto the jig and into position. And there they are. Two chassis rails that when fixed should be able to take all the load we can throw at them. We've made up some fillets to fix the angles in the cut chassis rails, and these get tacked in to make sure the whole thing stays put. So now we've just got to tack in the rest of the fillets. If you've ever lost a G-clamp and you're wondering where it is, the chances are Nick's got it.
So that's the two chassis rails tacked up in the shape they need to be. Now I need a cross member to hold them together.
We'll make this from the same material as the chassis rails. Lop the top off the box section, but with a staggered cut, as the sides will be on different levels where the boot floor curves down over it. Hammer over the flanges, and then weld it into position. Lovely.
Now that's in, I can build down to these rear subframe mounting plates.
You all know the drill. Cardboard template, transfer to steel, and then tack it into position. And repeat as necessary until finished. Or it's time for a brew, whichever comes first. Loathed as I am to admit it, he doesn't half make this look easy. I mean, I'm pretty good at filling for time over yet another interminable welding and cutting sequence, but Nick really takes the biscuit. Which reminds me, after we've taken a look at the finished rear subframe mount, it's almost certainly time for tea.
Anyway, tell me the story.
Now that the rear subframe mount towers are in place, it's time to have a look at the front ones. And this is where it all gets a little bit tricky. There's a lot going on in this area, so as well as the subframe mounting tower, whatever I build here has also got to tie into the end of the chassis rail, the subframe mount support, the trailing arm bracket, the floor, the old subframe mounting panel, the inner sill, the outer sill, and the sill tube. Oh, and at some point, the seat base has got to go back on, as well as the companion box. Simple.
That's quite a conundrum for even someone of Nick's ability. I don't think that just tea is going to be enough. This needs some proper thinking about. By Jove, I think he's got it.
I'm going to start by making the trailing arm bracket. We like a nice bracket around here, so just this once, with the aid of some clever editing, we're going to take you through the whole bracket start to finish. We're going to start with some 2mm plate. What else?
Okay, so this is what we want to end up with. The first thing we need to do is mark out the steel. Next we cut out the sheet to make the side plates, and then linish the edges off. We can centre pot where the holes will go, and then drill the pilot hole before moving on to the step drill. We then bend up the 90-degree returns. We've turned down an alley spacer to keep the side plates the correct distance apart, and we'll clamp it to a piece of box section to keep it flat while we make the fillets. Measure and mark out the next plate before cutting and linishing back. Now we can tack this new plate onto the completed side plates. Tap this plate down to follow the curve, and then we can weld it into place. Marking out the last pieces before cutting them out with the grinder and then tacking them to the bracket and then forming them over with the hammer. Finally, we can linish the whole thing back neatly and finish it off with a die grinder. And there we have it. One trailing arm bracket complete. Trouble is, Nick, we need two of them. Smart arse.
This is the rear trailing arm bracket in situ, along with the subframe mounting brace bracket. And this new bit of floor, hopefully, drops over the top. Now I need to sort what was the subframe mounting panel.
Now, no one likes a good bit of fabrication as much as me, apart from perhaps my wife, and some of her friends, and some of her friends' tennis partners. Come to think of it, everyone likes a good bit of fabrication more than me, but that's beside the point. What you're about to see is the zenith of fabrication, as far as I'm concerned. Here's that incredible piece of engineering being clamped into place with the shiny new bit of floor. I don't know how he does it for the money, to be honest. We'll get the plates tacked in and then crack on with the rest of the subframe mounts. But I think it's worth having a closer look at these in situ. Now that this lot is all tacked in, I say tacked, we don't do semi-permanent fixing, it ain't going anywhere now, it's time to move on to the strut towers. Here's the separate part of the jig that allows us to place the strut tops in the right place.
If you're wondering what these are all about, well, after a quick measure, it looks like there's not enough width in the mini body shell to get the struts in at the height they need to be. So what I've done is built in two 25mm spacers into the negative suspension jig thingy, which should allow me to adjust the strut top mount up and down, but still keep the geometry correct. Of course, before this goes in, some more mini's got to come out.
Really? There can't be much more mini left to cut out. At this rate, all that's going to be left is the roof.
The good news is, the strut towers might just sneak in behind the standard rear seat. The bad news, even if I lower the strut top mounts, the Mini's still not wide enough. So what to do about it? Well, there's a few different options, we've kicked them around, and what I'm going to do this time is I'm actually going to move the tops of the struts in about 20mm either side, give me enough distance between that and the outside of the body. Then I'm going to slot the hole in the strut to bring the wheel back upright again.
With the strut bolted to the flatbed to act as a pivot, we can see that 20mm movement at the top equates to around 2mm movement at the bottom, so that's how much slot we'll need to add. We've cut and bent the jig to allow for the different placement of the top mount while keeping the geometry exactly the same. Now that we've given ourselves room to manoeuvre, these new top mounts can be fitted to the jig and we can begin closing in the strut towers. So these 4 pieces of steel will make up the upstands from the chassis rails to the strut tops. And this is the closing piece for where the spring pan sits. These steel pizza slices make up the outer fillets for the chassis rails. The rear subframe mount is nearly complete now. We just need something to close this box up. These will do nicely. Now to put them into position and weld the whole thing up. Done. Simple as that. The rear suspension negative jig thingy has done us proud, but now that all the mounts are fixed, it can come out and gather dust in the corner, like Nick's wallet. Well, it's been weeks and weeks of hard graft to get the rear end more or less there, but finally there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's more to do, obviously, but now the front and rear suspension points are in, and they're not going anywhere. Everything that's gone into the back end is made out of 2mm steel. We're expecting to put some serious load through both ends of the Mini, so once finished this extra strength should be able to take anything we can throw at it.
I'm not finished at the back here by any means, but all of the rear suspension mounting points are in situ, and that's all I'm interested in right now, which means there's only one thing left to do.
So there we have it. The rear subframe, diff, shafts, hubs, brakes and struts are in. That's more than enough for this episode, I'd say. So tune in next time to hear me say...
Such a bellend.